Gabe. How lucky are we with our, what an outstanding representative of our party. And I have to say it was at least 50% luck. And I really worry about what happens when our luck runs out. I really would like to think that we could make our own luck. Anyway, I'm going to talk not very much philosophy, although you'll get the idea. Philosophical direction pretty easily from the topics that I mentioned. But I want to have a little talk about, first of all, my year in the Senate this past year and things that have happened, the state of the party, and then a bit about the future. I would like to acknowledge Tom Switzer and John Roscombe for coming along. It's very much appreciated. And of course, Bettina, how fantastic is she? I'll tell you a little interesting anecdote about Bettina. She came to see me in my office, in my electorate office here in Sydney, and said you know, she would like me to get involved in the domestic violence debate. She said she'd been struggling to find any politicians who'd take it up, and she'd asked John Howard what he thought she should do about it. And he said, go and see David Leyonhjelm. So she did, and he was right for once. So in the past year, I have notched up a few achievements, although I must say it is not easy being the sole senator in a very large crossbench. It really is hard to make progress, and especially when you don't want anything that costs money. In fact, Scott Morrison says he finds me frustrating because I don't ask for things that cost money. Nonetheless, I'll run through a little list here. Online poker became an issue. The government had a bill that was setting out to ban online gambling, included online poker. There's quite a big community of online poker players who all arced up. The Liberals. A couple of backbench Liberals came to me and said, this is overreach, but we can't do anything about it. Can you do something about it? This happens all the time. So Liberals come to me and say, can you talk about this? Can you do something about this? And I did. And eventually it got silly. The government wouldn't pay any attention. You know, there's a South Park episode about where there's really, really low frequency sounds has a very bad effect on the crowd.
Nanny State strikes back.
Anyway, so the government was paying no attention. I organised a Senate inquiry into online poker. It achieved nothing in terms of changing minds, although it gave me a lot of good evidence. So ultimately I said to the government, okay, you want my vote on this bill, you're not going to get it unless you move on it. And they moved. So now we are going to have online poker legalised. It won't be you know, a major reform, it'll just be a carve out for online poker, unfortunately. I wanted something more profound, but that's all we're going to get. There has been a bill go through which is intended to make housing more affordable. It won't achieve that, but anyway, the scheme is to allow you to put money into superannuation, additional money into superannuation to buy a house, take it out again, and it's tax advantaged under the First Home Super Saver scheme. It was all about first homes. I was very mindful of some of the issues that Bettina's raised about people who had broken up marriages and things like that and lost everything. And so I went to the Treasurer and said, I will support this, but you have to expand it to people who are in particular financial situations who are buying a house as well. And that was agreed, so that's been done. The government has had a number of bills come up this last 12 months on industrial relations presented by Michaelia Cash. Michaelia is a very good minister, by the way. I quite like her. I supported the ban on corrupting benefits to union officials, but the government always overreaches. They go for the reverse onus of proof or removing the right to silence or something like that, and I'm invariably arcing up over that, saying take it out, take it out. And they also give the minister tremendous power to expand the scope of the legislation by decree or virtually by regulation, and I say take it out as well, and I've had some success at that. You will recall the legislation regarding childcare subsidies went through the Parliament, sort of restructured the whole childcare arrangement and collapsed two subsidies into one, increased it to $10,000, but they were going to, it's an absolute racket, it's appalling, but they were going to leave it open-ended like the existing, or the old scheme was. And again, I arced up over that, where above which you are no longer able to achieve or obtain childcare subsidies. That saved $100 million over the first 3 years. And I haven't met anybody yet who says I got it wrong, apart from a couple of journalists who said, "Oh no, we're above that, and we reckon we should have our childcare subsidised." So I was able to give them a 2-word answer to that. There has been a lot of talk recently about the effect on journalism of the latest round of foreign spying type legislation. We have had quite a few bills come through the Senate where there have been threats to free speech and particularly threats to the press. There was one in the beginning, or going way back, which related to ASIO's protected operations and how they couldn't be reported, even when no one was endangered and the operation wasn't prejudiced, and even historically. And it was imposing jail terms on journalists and things like that. I fought it, and in fairness, so did the Greens. We failed, so it went off to the Inspector General, no, I can't remember, there's an official position of somebody who reviews national security legislation. He came back and said exactly what we'd been saying, which is this is overkill, recommended that journalists, an area for journalists be carved out where there wasn't any threat to national security, and it was old news and all that sort of stuff. And the government agreed, but then they had another one relating to the Australian Federal Police controlled operations, did almost exactly the same thing, and they weren't going to do anything about it. So I wrote to George Brandis and said, you can't ignore that, and he finally relented, so that's also being changed. On vaping, some of you will be aware that I have been fighting the fight for vaping e-cigarettes. It's a crazy policy that we have this prohibition towards it. We're not only stopping people from giving up smoking and thereby having the harmful effects that smoking has, but people are still importing e-cigarettes and juice, so local retailers are missing out. I have been fighting that one hard. The health department is just a bunch of health Nazis. They are appalling. Anything to do with smoking is just ridiculous. But Michaelia Cash needed my vote. I said, we've got to do something on this. So we now have an inquiry being run by CSIRO about to kick off, I think, next week. So with a bit of luck, it might come back with science-based analysis, and we might make a difference. You've heard already about my Committee on Red Tape, Senate Select Committee on Red Tape, which I chair. It's issued 4 interim reports. Interim reports, you don't want to issue a final report because that's the end of the committee. Interim reports are good because they allow to keep the inquiry going. I've now extended that committee until the end of this year. And, but the interim reports are useful because they can be distributed around, used as a basis for pushing back on regulation. They've been on tobacco retailing, sale and supply of alcohol, environmental green tape, and a report on pharmacy rules is imminent. Next Friday, this coming week, we have a hearing on health services and how the health suppliers mainly serve themselves rather than consumers. Labor amended the bill to introduce a GST on low-value imports, and I worked closely with Labor on that one to defer its implementation for a year. It's a very bad policy again. and we also referred it off to the Productivity Commission to consider it. Unfortunately, the Productivity Commission has come back and said, no, it's okay, and so it is going to go ahead, unfortunately. I introduced a private senator's bill on called model litigant. The model litigant is intended to require the Commonwealth to behave decently when it is a participant in legal action. The Commonwealth has a habit of being bastards, and because their pockets are bottomless, they can outspend the other side, and you end up with very poor justice. You know that I brought Milo Yiannopoulos to Parliament House. It generated huge publicity. I got abused and my character assessed very negatively for that, but it was all good fun. I have invited Jordan Peterson to Parliament as well for a similar sort of thing. He hasn't yet accepted. Trip to the Middle East with our defence forces to see what it was like over there, and I guess even though I think our defence forces are a pretty professional lot, I have to say I don't think it's very good use of our taxpayers' money for a naval navy to be running up and down the coast of Africa intercepting drug smugglers. And I have to say I share Tom Switzer's view about our involvement in the Middle East. I spoke out about the judges in Victoria who were threatening to jail 3 government ministers for contempt over commenting on criminal matters, and called them a bunch of daffodils. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, something like that. Apparently, that resonated around the Liberal Party like you wouldn't believe, and stiffened their resolve somewhat. And this sort of reinforces what John or Tom was saying, that the Liberal Party quite often will say to me, God, I wish I could have said that, or thank God you could say that. I don't get very involved in the culture wars, and I'm not entirely sure whether I should or not. Obviously I have a bit to say every now and again, and if you follow my Twitter account you'll know I lash out a bit on that, but overall I haven't got deeply involved in that, but that is under review. Now, just thinking in terms of the party, obviously Aaron's election to the West Australian Legislative Council was a major coup for the party. It was also a good process in terms of running a campaign over there, and it very much applicable to group voting ticket jurisdictions. Now that's now limited to Victoria, so quite serious. Just referring to the Senate and its situation, what I've discovered is that not everybody appreciates what a funny, dynamic, fluid place it is. I was elected for the first time in 2013, when sworn in mid-2014, and at that time there were 8 crossbenchers, and the government required 6 of us to vote for their legislation for them to have a majority. They all, except for myself, are now gone. All the other 7 are gone. Nick Xenophon resigned, has been replaced. Dia Wang didn't get elected, Glenn Lazarus didn't get elected, Jackie Lambie's resigned over the dual citizenship thing. John Madigan didn't get elected, Bob Day resigned, although he was later found ineligible. Ricky Muir didn't get elected, so I'm the only one left out of the 2013 crossbench. So it's a very fluid place, the Senate. And then we had Cory Bernardi, who left the Liberals and started out by himself. And then add on to that, Malcolm Roberts has been replaced by Fraser Anning, who's here today. Bob Day was replaced by Lucy Gashui, and Lucy Gashui has now joined the Liberals. Rod Cullerton was ruled ineligible due to bankruptcy. He's been replaced by Peter Giorgio. As I said, Nick Xenophon resigned, and he's been replaced by Rex Patrick. Jackie Lambie's replacement is not yet known. That's heading to the courts over the eligibility of the apparent replacement. And Sky Kokoschki-Moore from the Xenophon Party also resigned over dual citizenship, and her replacement is not yet clear either. It's looking like it might be somebody who left the Xenophon Party. That does raise this question of dual citizenship, and should I be interested in it? I take a certain amount of malicious fun out of winding up the journalists on that one and saying, well, I think you should go to Sweden and don't come back until you prove I'm a dual citizen. I'm hoping all the ABC and Fairfax guys take me up on that. But the fact is, the dual citizenship issue is a threat to our democracy. You will hear people say it's just politicians not doing their paperwork and you know, they follow the rules and you'll be fine. That's not true. That is not accurate. And I'll give you one example. I don't want to labour this point, but I'll give you one example just to sort of highlight it. Pat Dodson, the Labor senator, lives in Broome, Aboriginal Indigenous, identifies as Aboriginal. If you look on his declaration, his citizenship declarations, which we all had to do, he doesn't know who one of his grandparents is. Now, there has been suggestions that that grandparent might in fact be Irish. Now, if that grandparent was Irish or Polish, Pat would not be eligible to sit in the Parliament because he would be entitled to the rights and privileges of Irish citizenship. And can you imagine Pat Dodson, Indigenous senator, losing eligibility over the dual citizenship issue? That's the height of stupidity that we're at now, and it's going to have to be changed. There has going to have to be a referendum to change it. It cannot be fixed by legislation. I've sat through days of hearings listening to constitutional lawyers talking about what options there are, and that basically it comes down to there aren't any. The High Court has interpreted the Constitution very, very strictly. There is no wriggle room, and it's going to have to be fixed. So that's all. Unless you've got questions, I'll move away from that. Now, I do deal with the government a lot. I negotiate with the government a lot, and I have now developed this concept of liberty offsets, which I think I might have mentioned 12 months ago. So what I say to them is, look, I might vote against your bill or your amendment or whatever they want my vote for. I might just go to the toilet and be absent when the vote is held in order to induce me not to do that. Now, obviously that doesn't, there's no risk of that when it's a reduction in taxes, reduction in spending, or an increase in liberty. So obviously there are some things where my vote is not in doubt. But if it is in doubt, I'm finding that the government is increasingly getting its head around this idea of liberty offsets. You want me to vote for a bill in which there is a reverse onus of proof. Okay, I understand the imperative. I understand the fact that you think it's important that if you don't have it in there, the bill won't work. All right, what are you going to do to increase liberty somewhere else that will allow me to say, well, there's been no net reduction in liberty?